There is a certain kind of man who walks toward death not because he has nothing to live for, but because he has already decided that someone else deserves to live more than he does. This is the story of a mafia boss, a man who spent 30 years building an empire on fear, on violence, on silence. And then one night he walked into the most heavily guarded compound in Eastern Europe, alone, unarmed, to save the one man he had once paid $100,000 to have killed. Why? That question will change everything you think you know about loyalty, debt, and the kind of love that does not have a name. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome. This channel tells the stories that Hollywood is too afraid to make. Stories rooted in real human darkness and the impossible light that sometimes burns inside it. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with me because this story does not go where you think it is going. Not even close. Introduction: the man they called Dominic Cross. In the criminal underworld of Eastern Europe, specifically across the gray and violent stretch of territory that bleeds between three borders in the post-Soviet hinterland, there existed a man known only by a single name. Not his birth name, not the name on the false passport tucked inside his jacket. They called him Dominic Cross, and that name, just those two words, was enough to end arguments, enough to empty rooms, enough to make men who had killed dozens with their bare hands go very, very quiet. Dominic Cross was not the loudest man in the room. He was never the one waving his hands or raising his voice or making threats to prove a point. He was the stillness in the center of the storm. The man who sat down, ordered coffee, black with no sugar, and said very little. But what he said, he meant. Every single word. At 47 years old, Dominic Cross ran the most disciplined criminal network in the region. Trafficking routes, money laundering operations, political protection that stretched up into parliaments and ministries. He had not built this network through brutality alone, though there had been brutality, yes. He had built it through something rarer in that world: intelligence, patience, and a code of conduct so strict, so ironclad, that his men sometimes referred to it quietly among themselves as the religion. You do not betray Dominic Cross. You do not lie to Dominic Cross. You pay your debts. You honor your word. And if Dominic Cross gives you his, God help you if you make him regret it. But here is what almost no one knew about Dominic Cross. The thing that his most loyal lieutenants had never pieced together. The thing buried so deep in the past that even those who had been there had either forgotten it or convinced themselves it had not happened the way it did. 15 years ago, in a brutal winter in a city that no longer exists on the map, the same way Dominic Cross had tried to have a man killed. He had paid for it. He had planned it. He had watched the car leave to go do the job, and he had spent every single day since that night carrying the weight of what happened next, because the man had not died. And the reason he had not died would become the most important secret of Dominic Cross's life. This is not a story about crime. This is a story about a debt, about a promise made in the dark that no one else ever heard, and about one night, one impossible, suicidal, extraordinary night, when Dominic Cross decided it was finally time to pay it. The call that changed everything. It was a Thursday in November when the call came, not to Dominic Cross's secure line, not through the encrypted channels his organization used for sensitive business. It came to a phone number that had not been used in 11 years. A number so old, so buried, that Dominic Cross had genuinely forgotten it still existed. But someone knew it, someone who should not have. Dominic Cross was in Vienna when it happened. He had traveled there under a different name, a legitimate business trip on paper, tied to a real estate holding company he owned through 3 layers of shell corporations. He was having dinner, alone, as was his habit when traveling, a corner table at a restaurant that required reservations 6 weeks in advance. He had almost finished his wine when his second phone, the old one, the buried one, began to vibrate in his inside jacket pocket. He did not answer it. He stared at it for a long moment, lying on the white tablecloth beside his glass, buzzing against the linen like something trying to claw its way up from underground. Then it stopped. Dominic Cross took another sip of wine, set the glass down, picked up the phone. There was a message, no number, routed through a bounce system that even his technology team would have struggled to trace in under 48 hours. 3 words. "They have Milo." Dominic Cross read those 3 words twice. Then he set the phone face down on the table, very carefully, as if it were made of glass. He sat completely still for 45 seconds. The waiter came with dessert. Dominic Cross waved it away without looking up. For 45 seconds, the man who could manage a crisis with the calm of a surgeon, the man they called the architect because of the cold precision with which he built and dismantled situations, simply sat. Because those 3 words had done something that almost nothing in 30 years of this life had managed to do. They had made his hands tremble. Let me tell you about Milo. Milo Vargas was not from Dominic Cross's world, originally. He was the son of a Spanish diplomat and a Ukrainian concert pianist, a combination that had given him cheekbones like sculpture, and a fluency in 6 languages that he wore as casually as other men wore their watches. He had grown up between embassies and concert halls and the kind of international schools where the children of the powerful and the privileged learn to navigate the world with a confidence that looks, from the outside, like arrogance. But Milo was not arrogant. He was, in fact, one of the warmest human beings Dominic Cross had ever known, which made what happened between them, what Dominic Cross had done to him, all the more unforgivable. They had met 20 years ago, both young men, both hungry, both clever enough to see that the legitimate world moved too slowly for minds like theirs. Milo had drifted into the trade routes business. Import and export, he called it, which was technically true if you counted the things he was importing and exporting. He was good at it. Brilliant, actually. And for 3 years he and Dominic Cross had been partners, not just business partners, friends. The kind of friendship that forms in the fire of shared danger, that particular intimacy of men who have trusted each other with their lives and found that trust returned. Which is exactly why what happened in year 4 hurt so much, and why what Dominic Cross did in response to it was so catastrophic, so irreversible, so wrong. The details of the falling out between Dominic Cross and Milo are something we will return to, but what you need to understand right now is this. Those 3 words, "they have Milo," were not just a message about a man from his past. They were a trigger, the kind that unlocks a room you have kept sealed for 15 years and suddenly every smell, every shadow, every sound comes rushing back out at once. Dominic Cross paid his bill in cash. He left the restaurant and walked 3 blocks to a parked car where his driver was waiting. He did not get in. He sent his driver home. Then he stood alone on a wet Viennese street at 9:30 in the evening and made a single phone call to a man named Dresch, his oldest lieutenant, a man who had been with Dominic Cross for 22 years and who knew more about the organization than anyone except Dominic Cross himself. "Get me everything," Dominic Cross said when Dresch picked up. "Everything about what?" Dresch asked. "Was." The sound of Dresch going very still on the other end of the line was almost audible, because Dresch knew that name, and Dresch knew what that name meant, what it would mean if Dominic Cross was asking about it now, after all this time. "How fast do you need it?" Dresch asked quietly. "Yesterday," said Dominic Cross, and hung up. Who was Voss, and what had he done to Milo, the man Dominic Cross had once tried to have killed and had apparently never stopped watching from a distance? That answer was going to cost someone everything. The empire of VOSS. Victor Voss was not a man who had come to power through intelligence. He had come to power through a quality far more dangerous in the criminal world: absolute ruthlessness. Not the calculated, strategic ruthlessness of a man like Dominic Cross, who used violence as a tool, a last resort, a message sent when all other messages had failed. No, Voss's ruthlessness was something different. It was enthusiastic. In the intelligence files that Dresch assembled and sent to Dominic Cross's encrypted device within 6 hours of that phone call, Victor Voss was described in the careful clinical language of an Interpol assessment as exhibiting a pattern of disproportionate violence with apparent satisfaction derived from public demonstration, which was the bureaucratic way of saying that Victor Voss enjoyed it. He had started small, a mid-level enforcer in the Russian-adjacent network that operated through the Baltic states in the early 2000s, but Voss was not a man who stayed small. He had a gift for identifying weakness, not just in organizations, in people. He could look at a man across a table and find within minutes the precise thing that man was most afraid to lose: his children, his pride, his secrets. And then Voss would smile, a wide, almost childlike smile according to those who had sat across that table, and he would explain very pleasantly what was going to happen if that man did not cooperate. Over 15 years he had used this talent to dismantle 3 criminal organizations from the inside and absorb them into his own. He had not defeated his rivals by going to war with them. He had turned their own people against them. He had bought them, blackmailed them, or when neither worked, frightened them in ways that left no marks. By the time Dominic Cross received that file in Vienna, Victor Voss controlled a compound in the borderlands, a former Soviet military installation purchased through a series of legitimate front companies that housed approximately 40 armed men at any given time. Former special forces, private military contractors, men who had done tour in conflict zones that did not appear in any newspaper and had come home to find that the only work that paid well enough was work like this. The compound had 3 security perimeters, motion sensors, thermal cameras that operated at night, an internal communication system that ran on a closed loop, no signal in, no signal out to prevent electronic surveillance. And at the center of that compound, in what had once been a Soviet command facility, was a holding facility, a place where Voss kept people he found useful to have around. Not prisoners exactly. He preferred the word guests. Guests whose presence gave other people outside the compound reasons to behave. Milo Vargas had been a guest of Victor Voss for 11 days when Dominic Cross received that message. How Voss had found him, how he had even known who Milo was, or what connection that name might pull on in Dominic Cross's world. That was the question circling in Dominic Cross's mind during the 4-hour drive from Vienna to the secondary safe house in Slovakia where he had sent himself to think. Because Milo Vargas had been, for the past 8 years, nobody. Or at least that was what he had been trying very hard to be. After the falling out with Dominic Cross. After the attempt on his life that Dominic Cross had authorized and then, for reasons that Dominic Cross had never explained to anyone, had stopped at the last possible second. After surviving all of that, Milo had disappeared. Not dramatically. Not in the way that men in this world usually disappear, running and hiding and always looking over their shoulders. He had simply stepped out, quietly, changed his name, moved to a small coastal city in Portugal, taught private language lessons, lived a small, careful, honest life. So how had Voss found him? The file Dresch sent contained one possible answer, a note 3 lines long appended to the intelligence summary. Voss is looking for the Karst ledger. He believes Vargas has it or knows where it is. He may be wrong. He may not care. The Karst ledger. Dominic Cross read those 3 words and sat down on the edge of the bed in the safe house. He had not heard that name spoken or written or even consciously thought about in over a decade. The Karst ledger was not a physical object. It was a record. A complete accounting of transactions, names, dates, and connections that tied together nearly every major criminal organization operating in the region, and a number of major legitimate ones as well. Politicians, judges, police commissioners, corporate executives, documented with the kind of meticulous, obsessive detail that could, if it ever reached the right hands, collapse governments, destroy fortunes, and send hundreds of powerful people to prison. It had been assembled over years by a man none of them had ever met in person, a man known only as Karst, And the reason it mattered now, the reason Voss was hunting for it, was that Karst was dead. He had died 8 months ago, and before he died he had sent pieces of it, encrypted fragments scattered across different carriers to different people. A kind of insurance policy, a deadman's handshake. Dominic Cross knew with cold certainty why Voss believed Milo had access to it. Because Dominic Cross was the one who had made sure that a fragment reached Milo 2 years ago. Not to use, not to threaten anyone with, simply because Karst had asked him to, in a letter delivered through 3 intermediaries a month before Karst's death. Keep this safe, away from the network, away from anyone who would use it. And Dominic Cross had thought of Milo, living his quiet, honest life in Portugal, the last truly clean pair of hands he knew. Which meant that Dominic Cross, in trying to honor one dead man's wishes, had placed a target on the back of the man he had already spent 15 years trying to protect from exactly this kind of thing. He had done it again. He had put Milo in danger, and this time there was no one else to blame. Dominic Cross had caused this. That was the truth. He sat within that cold, safe house in Slovakia, and there was only one way forward. But that way forward was not a plan. It was a death wish, and Dominic Cross knew it. The council says no. 24 hours after receiving that message in Vienna, Dominic Cross called a council. Not a large one. 5 men total, including himself. The inner circle, the only people who knew the full shape of the organization, who sat at the real table and not the one that existed for appearances. Dresch, his oldest lieutenant, 51 years old, former military intelligence, the kind of man who could read a room the way other people read a book. Petra, his operations coordinator, the only woman in the inner circle and the most ruthless financial mind in the organization. She had been with Dominic Cross for 14 years and had never once made a decision based on emotion. Radek, head of security, former private contractor who had redesigned Dominic Cross's entire protection infrastructure 8 years ago and had kept it current ever since. And Lev, the youngest of them at 33, a technological genius who had built their communication systems from scratch and could breach almost any digital security architecture given enough time. They met in a villa outside Bratislava, a place with no cell signal, no Wi-Fi, no cameras except Radek's own. Dominic Cross laid it out for them in 20 minutes. Milo Vargas, Victor Voss, the compound, the ledger fragment, what he needed to do. When he finished, no one spoke for almost a full minute. Then Petra said very quietly, "No." Dominic Cross looked at her. She did not flinch. She never did. She said that compound has 40 armed personnel, thermal imaging, and 3 security perimeters. Their intelligence on the interior was 8 months old. They did not know current guard rotations. They did not know how many people Voss had brought in since then. They did not know the layout of the holding facility. "I know," said Dominic Cross. "Then you understand why the answer is no." Dresch cleared his throat. "Who is Milo Vargas?" he said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking, because Dresch, who knew everything about Dominic Cross's organization and had been there for almost all of it, had heard that name exactly once before, years ago, and Dominic Cross had shut the conversation down before it started. "Someone I owe a debt to," Dominic Cross said. "What kind of debt?" Radek asked. "The permanent kind." Lev, who had been quiet until now, said he could work on breaching their communication system given enough time. 48 to 72 hours to map the frequency architecture and find a gap. But even then, that only gave them eyes and ears. It would not get anyone in or out. "What is the approach to the compound?" Dresch asked. "Forest on 3 sides," Dominic Cross said. "A service road on the north face, that is how supply trucks get in. 1 gate, 2 guard posts." "And the south?" Dominic Cross paused. "River," he said. "The south boundary is a river, no sensors in the water." "A beat," everyone processed this. "That is a winter river in the borderlands," Dresch said carefully. "In November." "Yes," said Dominic Cross. "You are not seriously considering this," Petra started. "I am not considering anything," Dominic Cross said. "I am going. The question is whether any of you want to help with the preparation." What followed was 3 hours of argument. The most heated, the most honest, and in many ways the most painful meeting that Inner Circle had ever sat through. Because unlike most arguments in that world, where men posture and position and rarely say what they actually mean, this one was nakedly real. Petra said he was going to get himself killed over someone who had left this world behind. Someone who was, with respect, nobody now. Not to them, not to the network, not to anyone who mattered in this business. She was not wrong. Radek said even if they could get him in, even if the river approach worked and Lev got them into the communications, Dominic Cross still had 40 guns between him and whoever they were holding. That was not a mission. That was a funeral. He was not wrong either. Dresch said nothing for a long time, and then very quietly he said, "Tell me about the debt." And that was the moment. Dominic Cross looked at Dresch for a long time. Then he looked at all of them. These 4 people who had given years of their lives to him, who had trusted him with decisions that had consequences none of them could fully predict, who had followed his code, the religion, because it had kept them alive and solvent, and in whatever way that word could apply to people like them, intact. And he said something he had never said to anyone. He told them what had happened 15 years ago. Not all of it, not the deepest part, but enough. Enough for Dresch to nod slowly in the way he nodded when something finally made sense. Enough for Radek to stop arguing. Enough for Lev to look at his hands. Enough for Petra, who had never once in 14 years allowed herself to be moved by anything that was not a number on a spreadsheet, to look away from Dominic Cross for a moment, out the window, at the dark. "How long do we have?" Dresch asked finally. "Voss has been working on Milo for 11 days, Dominic Cross said. "He does not have what he wants yet, which means Milo has not broken, but Voss is patient. He will not kill Milo while there is still a chance of getting the ledger fragment. We have maybe 10 days, maybe less." Dresch nodded again. He looked at Lev and said to start working on their communications. He looked at Radek and asked for current satellite imagery of the compound, last 48 hours if possible. Then he looked at Petra. Petra stared at the table for a long moment. Then, without looking up, she said she would arrange the logistics. Safe houses on the approach route, vehicles, medical. She paused and added that she wanted it on record that she thought this was the stupidest thing the organization had ever done. "Noted," said Dominic Cross. The council had said yes, not because the plan was good. It was not. Not because the odds were favorable. They were not. They had said yes because of something Dominic Cross had told them, something about a debt and a night 15 years ago that had changed the atmosphere in that room from argument to something quieter, more serious. Something that felt, for the first time in a long time, like it mattered. The ghost in Portugal. Before we follow Dominic Cross through the dark water and into the belly of the most dangerous place he had ever voluntarily entered, we need to go back 8 years, to a small city on the Portuguese Atlantic coast, to a man who was learning, very slowly and very deliberately, how to be someone other than who he had been. Milo Vargas had arrived in this city with a different name on his passport, a bank account containing enough to be comfortable but not enough to be conspicuous, and a single rule he had made for himself: no looking back. The rule was not about denial. It was not that he refused to think about the past. It was more specific than that. It meant no contact, no reaching out to anyone from the old world, no trying to understand what had happened between him and Dominic Cross, no seeking explanations, no grieving what they had been to each other before everything broke. Just move forward, just live. For the first year the rule was hard, not because of the danger, though the danger was real and he felt it every day, that particular hypervigilance that men from that world carry long after they have left it. No, the rule was hard because of the loneliness, Because Milo was, at his core, beneath the languages and the diplomatic upbringing and the years of operating in shadows, a deeply social creature. He had always had people around him. Always had conversation, complexity, the friction of other minds against his own. And now he had an apartment and language textbooks and the sound of the ocean. But then something happened that Milo had not predicted. He discovered that he liked it, the smallness of it. The way ordinary days had a texture to them, coffee in the morning, the walk to the market, a student struggling with subjunctive tense, that the enormous adrenaline-soaked days of his previous life had never had. Those days had been loud and fast and full of consequence, but they had not been full, not in the way this quiet life was full. He made friends, slowly, carefully, always with that internal radar running at a low frequency, checking and monitoring and never fully off, but real friends nonetheless. A retired fisherman named Augusto who had been everywhere and asked nothing. A Polish architect named Ua who was renting the apartment below his, and who would leave small plates of food outside his door when she made too much, without comment, without expectation. And his students, a rotating cast of people learning English, French, Spanish, and German from a man who spoke all of them without an accent, and who, when they asked where he was from, smiled and said everywhere, and somehow made it land like poetry rather than evasion. The package had arrived 14 months before Voss's men came for him. It had come through 3 layers of intermediary, a law firm in Lisbon, a courier company, a hand-delivered envelope slipped under his door at night. Inside it was a USB drive and a single handwritten note. Milo, I am asking you to hold this, not to open it, not to use it, only to keep it. It is safer with you than anywhere else I can think of. I am sorry for the necessity. DC. He had known immediately who DC was. He had sat with the package for a long time. He had thought about throwing it away, into the ocean, into a fire, out of his life and back into the world he had left. He had thought about sending it back through the same labyrinthine route it had come. And then he had done something that surprised even himself. He had put it in a locked box under the floorboard beneath his wardrobe and gone back to his life. Not because he forgave Dominic Cross, not because he owed Dominic Cross anything, but because the note had used a particular word, safer, safer with you. And despite everything, despite the betrayal and the years of silence and the thing that had been tried against him in that brutal winter long ago, some part of Milo still, infuriatingly, irrevocably, recognized that if Dominic Cross said something was true, it was true. The man had many sins. Dishonesty had never been among them. 14 months later, 4 men came to his apartment at 3 in the morning. They were professional. They were quiet. They used a sedative rather than violence. And when Milo woke up, he was in a vehicle moving fast through dark countryside with zip ties on his wrists and a blindfold over his eyes, and the clear, cold understanding that wherever he was going, the man who had sent him there was not done with him yet. Milo had held onto the package. He had kept the secret. He had honored a debt of his own, a debt to the word of a man who had once tried to take his life. And now that decision had led him here, blindfolded, captive, in the hands of someone who would use everything at his disposal to find what was hidden under a Portuguese floorboard. But what neither Voss nor anyone else knew was this. What was on that USB drive was not just a ledger fragment. It was a fuse, and only one person on Earth knew exactly how big the explosion would be. What happened 15 years ago? Now I will tell you. What Dominic Cross told his inner circle in that villa in Slovakia. What he had never told anyone. What had been living in the locked room at the center of him for 15 years. The year Dominic Cross tried to have Milo killed began not with a betrayal. It began with a mistake. Milo's mistake. At the height of their partnership, Dominic Cross and Milo had been managing a network that moved capital across 6 countries. Some of it dirty money being cleaned, some of it legitimate business being run alongside the dark work in a way that was becoming increasingly common in that post-Soviet transitional economy. It was complex work that required absolute coordination and absolute trust, because a mistake, a single error of judgment, a single piece of information given to the wrong person could bring everything down. And Milo had made that error, not from greed, not from treachery, from the very quality that had always been both his greatest strength and his most dangerous vulnerability. He had trusted someone. A man named Ferenczi, a Hungarian intermediary who had been part of their network for 2 years and who had, over those 2 years, become someone Milo considered a friend. Ferenczi had been working for the other side, not all along, which would have been simpler and more comprehensible. He had been turned 6 months in by a rival organization that had identified Milo's warmth toward him and decided to weaponize it. They had found what Ferenczi valued most, his daughter. And they had made him an offer he could not refuse. So Ferenczi had fed information. Small pieces at first, nothing catastrophic. But over time, the pieces had assembled into something that cost Dominic Cross's organization 2 supply routes, a political contact it had taken 3 years to cultivate, and worst of all, the exposure of a money laundering structure that had taken Dominic Cross 18 months to build. The damage was enormous, and the source of the leak, when Dominic Cross's people eventually traced it, had led directly to Milo. Dominic Cross had been 32 years old, and he had been, for the first time in his life, completely blindsided, not because of the financial damage. He could rebuild that. Not even because of the exposure, as serious as it was. He had managed exposures before. What had hit him, what had cracked something open inside him that he had not even known was there, was the fact that it had come from Milo, from the one person he had allowed all the way in. The one person he had trusted not just with the business, but with the thoughts behind the business, the doubts, the plans, the version of himself that existed before the careful, strategic, unreadable Dominic Cross that the world saw. And Milo had let it happen, had let his warmth, his beautiful, maddening, ruinous warmth, be used to destroy the thing they had built together. He had made the call in a state of grief, not rage, though rage was there too underneath, but primarily grief. The specific grief of a man who has just understood that the one person he truly trusted did not deserve it. The man he called was named Stintz, a contractor, reliable, professional. Dominic Cross gave him a name, an address, a photograph, and a number, and then he hung up and sat down and waited. The contract had been placed on a Tuesday. By Thursday evening, Stintz had located Milo. He was in the city, in a bar of all places, the ordinary kind with ordinary people, having a drink at the end of what Stintz's report described as an apparently normal day, as if Milo had no idea what was coming, which he did not. That was the thing that would haunt Dominic Cross for years afterward. Milo had no idea. He had not run. He had not hidden. He had simply gone to a bar and ordered a beer and sat down at the end of a normal Thursday. Because whatever mistakes he had made, however catastrophically his trust in Ferenczi had been exploited, Milo had not known he was betraying Dominic Cross. He had not given information knowingly, willingly, maliciously. He had simply trusted the wrong man. Dominic Cross learned this on the Friday, 24 hours after placing the contract. One of his other men, tracking the source of the leak from a different direction, had found the evidence of Ferenczi's arrangement with the rival organization, had found the proof that Milo had not known, had found the proof that Milo had been not the source of the betrayal, but the vehicle through which someone else's betrayal had traveled. Dominic Cross had called Stintz immediately. "Stand down," he said. Stintz said he was outside the bar and could do it in 10 minutes. "Stand down." Dominic Cross, Stintz said. "Stand down," Dominic Cross said. Stintz had stood down. Milo had walked home that night not knowing that he had been 8 minutes and 30 meters from the end of his life. He never knew. Dominic Cross never told him. And in the aftermath, in the painful, complicated wreckage of what the leak had cost them and the truth of where it had come from, Dominic Cross had made a decision that still shamed him when he thought about it. He had not gone to Milo. He had not explained. He had not said, "I was wrong, I acted in grief. I did not know the truth and I should have before I did what I did, and I am sorry." He had sent Milo a message through an intermediary. Partnership dissolved. Do not contact me. Do not come back. And Milo, who was not a fool, who understood that something had broken, had honored it, had disappeared, had built his quiet life. And Dominic Cross had carried the debt ever since. Not publicly, not in the way of a man who seeks absolution, in the private, punishing way of a man who does not believe he deserves it. He had saved Milo by one phone call 15 years ago, and he had been trying to find a way to deserve that ever since. Preparations for the impossible. 6 days. That was what they had by Dominic Cross's reckoning. 6 days before Voss ran out of patience, or ran out of methods, or decided that the ledger fragment was less important than the message he could send with Milo's death. 6 days to put together a plan that should not have been survivable. And yet Dominic Cross's inner circle, with all the efficiency and controlled intensity that made them what they were, had by day 3 assembled something that at least had a theoretical architecture. Lev had breached Voss's communication system on day 2. Not fully, not in a way that gave them visibility over every channel, but enough. He had found a frequency gap in the eastern perimeter sensor array, a ghost in the system probably created during a firmware update that had been applied unevenly across the installation. A window, roughly 9 meters wide, in the sensor coverage on the east bank of the river. A window that existed for approximately 6 minutes every 47 minutes, as the sensor array ran its automated recalibration cycle. 6 minutes, Radic had said, staring at the data. 6 minutes, Lev confirmed. To cross a river in November, Radic said, and get through the window before it closes, Lev added. And then what, Radic asked. And then Lev said, you are inside the sensor perimeter but still outside the fence. How long from river to fence, Radic asked. If you are running, 40 to 45 seconds, Lev said. And if you cannot run because you have just swum a November river, Radic asked. Silence. This was the reality of the plan. Not just its danger, though the danger was obvious and total. Its physical brutality. Dominic Cross would have to enter the river upstream in darkness, in water cold enough to induce hypothermia within minutes of immersion. He would have to cross silently, reach the east bank within the sensor window, cross the distance to the fence before his muscles seized from cold, and then breach the fence before the window closed and the sensors reactivated. All of this alone. He had been absolutely clear about that part. I go alone, he had said. Dresch had started to protest. Alone, Dominic Cross said. Final, non-negotiable. If I go in with a team, we become a visible footprint. One man is invisible. One man can move through a compound with 40 guards in a way that 5 men cannot. And if something goes wrong, Dresch asked, then I deal with it. And if something goes wrong that you cannot deal with. Dominic Cross had looked at him for a moment. Then we learned something useful about the limits of what I can do. The signal disruptor was Lev's masterpiece for this mission. It would not shut down Voss's communication system, because that would have been immediately visible and would have triggered an alarm. What it would do, when activated, was introduce interference into the internal frequency that Voss's guards used to communicate with each other. Not silence, static, intermittent, irregular, the kind of interference that happens naturally in old installations with poorly maintained equipment. It will buy maybe 3 minutes before someone realizes it is not random, Lev said. 3 minutes, Dominic Cross said. If they are paying attention, Lev added, and if they are not, maybe 5. 5 minutes of communication disruption, a 9-meter sensor gap, a fence that Radic had calculated could be cut in under 90 seconds with the right tool, and then the compound itself. The holding facility was in the northwest corner, 17 buildings between the river fence and that corner, 40 guards. At night, according to the patrol schedules Lev had pulled from the communication feeds, 12 active patrols and 28 in the barracks. It is not enough, Petra said, looking at the board. No, Dominic Cross agreed. You are going to run into someone, she said. Almost certainly, he said. And then I will adapt. On the 5th day, Dresch came to find Dominic Cross in the evening. They sat outside on the steps of the safe house in the cold with coffee. Dresch was quiet for a while. Then he said Dominic Cross should know that Milo might not be the same man. 8 years alone. Whatever Voss had done to him in there. He might not be who Dominic Cross remembered. He does not need to be who I remember, Dominic Cross said. He just needs to be alive. Dresch was quiet again. And you, he said. After this, assuming there is an after this, what then? Dominic Cross thought about it. I owe him more than a rescue, he said finally. What do you owe him? Dresch asked. The truth, Dominic Cross said. About what I did. About why. About all of it. He might not want to hear it, Dresch said. No, Dominic Cross agreed, he might not. Would that change anything? Dominic Cross looked at his coffee for a moment. No, he said. The truth is what I owe. Whether he wants it is up to him. The night of the mission. The 6th night. Dominic Cross changed into the thermal immersion gear at the safe house, moved to the insertion point on foot through 2 kilometers of forest, and reached the river at 2:17 in the morning. He stood at the bank and looked across. The compound lights were visible through the trees on the far side, the steady glow of the perimeter lighting, and above it the darker shapes of the buildings inside. Somewhere in there, somewhere in that compound of armed men and cold wire fences, and a man who collected other people's vulnerabilities like trophies, Milo was alive. He had to be. Dominic Cross pulled on his gloves, checked the signal disruptor in his jacket, checked the cutting tool on his belt, checked the compact sidearm secured against his chest. Through the earpiece, Lev spoke quietly. Sensor window opens in 4 minutes. Copy, Dominic Cross said. Current temperature of the water, Lev started. Do not tell me, Dominic Cross said. A pause. Fair enough, said Lev. 3 minutes. Dominic Cross stood at the bank. He breathed. In this world, the world he had inhabited for 30 years, there was a particular quality of silence that preceded violence. He knew it well. Had felt it before operations, before confrontations, before the moments when everything clarified into the pure, unambiguous simplicity of immediate danger. This silence was different, deeper, because this was not just danger, this was reckoning. This was the thing he should have done 15 years ago, not this mission specifically, but the honesty of it, the willingness to stand on the edge of what he owed and step in without hesitation. The cold water was almost beside the point. Window opens in 60 seconds, Lev said. Copy, Dominic Cross. Yes, come back. Do my best, said Dominic Cross. He stepped into the river. The cold hit him like a fist. Not just cold, but annihilating cold, the kind that makes the body flinch every single muscle at once, that drives the breath out of the lungs in a gasp that Dominic Cross barely managed to suppress. He forced himself under, forced his limbs to move, forced the crossing. 15 meters of black water. The current was stronger than the aerial images had suggested, pushing him slightly downstream away from the sensor gap. He corrected, pushed harder. His hands were going numb inside the gloves. His legs were still moving, but the sensation was already starting to go, that particular terrifying numbness that begins at the extremities and works inward. The far bank. He grabbed the mud and hauled himself out. 43 seconds. The sensor gap was 6 minutes. He had 5 minutes and 17 seconds. He ran. 45 seconds to the fence. His legs were functioning. The cold had not taken that, not yet. He reached the fence and pressed himself against it, reached for the cutting tool, worked fast and quiet along the base of one fence post. 60 seconds. Too slow. 80 seconds. The hole was large enough. He went through. Inside the second perimeter, he pressed against the side of the nearest building and breathed and let the stillness settle and listened. Voices. 2 guards, 30 meters east, moving away. He went west. Here is what happened in the next 22 minutes, compressed into the essential moments. Dominic Cross moved through the compound using the architectural map Radic had reconstructed from satellite imagery and the sound of Lev's breathing in his earpiece. He encountered his first guard at the 3rd building, a man walking a solo patrol cutting across between structures on a route that should not have been in Lev's schedule. An irregular, Someone who was not following the rotation. Dominic Cross flattened against the wall. The guard walked past, close enough that Dominic Cross could have touched him, without looking sideways. The second encounter was harder. 2 guards at the entrance to the northwest sector where the holding facility was located. They were stationary, not patrolling, guarding. Dominic Cross activated the signal disruptor. The guards' radios began to crackle. One of them pulled his from his belt and frowned at it. The other one pulled his out too. They were both looking at their radios. Dominic Cross moved, fast and silent through the shadow between the buildings, past them to the door behind them. A keypad. Through the earpiece, Lev said the emergency override was 7741, that Voss used the same code across all internal systems, arrogant as he was. Dominic Cross punched in the numbers. The door clicked. He went through. The holding facility was a long corridor. Concrete, fluorescent lighting, some of it failing and flickering. 6 doors on each side. Heavy steel, small viewing windows. Dominic Cross moved down the corridor quickly, checking each window. Empty, empty, empty. 4th door on the right. A figure sitting against the far wall. A man not moving. He had not seen Milo in 8 years. Time and whatever Voss had put him through had done things to his face. Older, thinner, with the particular hollowness around the eyes that comes from sustained fear and poor sleep. But it was him. Unmistakably, completely, it was Milo. Dominic Cross stood at the door for 1 second. 1 second of everything. 15 years of debt and silence and the weight of a decision made in grief. Then he opened the door. The man on the floor looked up. Dominic Cross stood in the doorway. Milo stared at him. Neither man spoke for a very long moment. And then Milo said in a voice that was rough from disuse and dry from captivity and absolutely unmistakably his, "You have got to be kidding me." And despite everything, despite the 40 guards and the November cold still soaking Dominic Cross's bones, and the signal disruptor with maybe 90 seconds left, something that was almost a laugh moved through that corridor. The betrayal. There was no time for anything. No time for explanation, for history, for the enormous things that would need to be said between these 2 men before anything between them could be resolved. There was only move. Dominic Cross had set a return window with Lev, a 40-minute operational window from entry to extraction point back at the river. He had used 22 minutes getting in. He had 18 left. Milo was in better physical condition than Dominic Cross had feared. Bruised, malnourished, shaken, but mobile. His mind clearly was entirely intact. He asked no questions. He followed. He matched Dominic Cross's pace and his silence and moved through the shadows of the northwest sector with the muscle memory of a man who had once known exactly how to do this and apparently had not entirely lost it. They were 40 meters from the fence when the disruptor died. Dominic Cross had expected this. He had timed for it. What he had not planned for was the guard who was standing exactly where no guard should have been, between them and the fence hole, not patrolling, standing completely still, facing the fence, apparently staring at nothing. Dominic Cross stopped and held up a fist. Milo froze behind him. Through the earpiece, Lev said he had 2 patrols converging on their position in about 90 seconds. Dominic Cross looked at the guard. He looked at the fence. He looked at Milo. Then Milo did something Dominic Cross had not anticipated. He touched Dominic Cross's arm and pointed east. A gap between 2 buildings, a path that Dominic Cross had not seen in the dark, that would take them around the standing guard, adding time but avoiding contact. Dominic Cross looked at him. Milo looked back. He still knew how to read a situation. Still had that intelligence, that spatial awareness that had always been part of what made him exceptional. They went east. The standing guard never turned. The patrol that had been converging passed behind them. 35 seconds of held breath, and then the fence. The hole Dominic Cross had cut. They went through, sprinting now, no more caution. The river. Dominic Cross in first, the cold hitting him again, worse this time. Milo in behind him, the crossing, the far bank, both men on the ground breathing hard, alive. Through the earpiece Lev's voice came, very quiet, with something in it that might have been relief. He said he could see them both and that the vehicle was 300 meters north. They moved. But something was wrong. Dominic Cross felt it before he understood it. A specific quality of silence on the communications line, a gap where Lev's voice should have been. Then a sound from the direction of the vehicle, not Lev's voice, another voice, one that Dominic Cross recognized, and the recognition hit him like a second river. Dresh's voice, speaking in a frequency that went to someone other than Dominic Cross, speaking quickly, quietly, in a direction Dominic Cross was not meant to hear. Coordinates, river extraction point, both subjects alive. Dominic Cross stopped walking. Milo, 3 paces ahead, stopped and turned. He looked at Dominic Cross's face, and the thing he saw there made his own face change, because Milo had always been able to read Dominic Cross even before Dominic Cross could read himself. What Milo said quietly. Dominic Cross did not answer. He was running back through it, all of it, the past 6 days, the council meeting, the too easy agreement, the mission that had despite everything gone almost too smoothly, the guard standing at the wrong place at the wrong time and then not at the wrong place, at exactly the right place, to herd them east, to the gap between the buildings, to the path that added exactly enough time for the patrol to pass without engaging them. The mission had gone smoothly because someone had cleared his path, not all the way, not enough to be obvious, but enough to make the difference between a suicide mission and a survivable one. And the reason someone had cleared his path was not to help him rescue Milo. It was to make sure both of them made it out of that compound alive, together, at the same place, at the same time, for delivery. "How much do you trust me?" Dominic Cross said. Milo stared at him for a moment. "About as much as you probably deserve," he said carefully. "That will have to do," said Dominic Cross, "because we need to go north and we need to go right now, and in about 3 minutes someone is going to realize we did not go to the vehicle." "Who?" Milo said. Dominic Cross's jaw tightened. "Someone I trusted," he said quietly. "How much did you trust them?" Dominic Cross looked at him. "About as much as I probably deserved," he said. And they ran north, into the forest, into the dark, away from the vehicle, away from Dresh. The second major twist fully detonated. The man who had organized this mission, the man Dominic Cross trusted most after 30 years, had sold them. To whom? For what? And why had he helped clear the path inside the compound if he was going to deliver them at the extraction point? What was the difference between Dominic Cross dead inside Voss's compound and Dominic Cross alive but captured on the riverbank? The answer to that question was the most important answer in the whole story. The truth about DRSH. They ran for 15 minutes before Dominic Cross allowed them to stop. He chose a ravine, a natural depression in the forest floor that provided cover from 3 sides, and they crouched in it, breathing hard, listening to the forest around them. Distant sounds from the compound, an alarm starting up and then cutting off. Deliberate, Dominic Cross thought. Voss cutting the alarm intentionally to avoid drawing outside attention while he organized a search. Smart. Controlled. Dominic Cross pulled out the secondary earpiece, the one that ran on a different frequency. He held it for a moment, then put it in. Static. Then Lev's voice, not the composed Lev of 6 days of preparation, but a different Lev, frightened. "Dominic Cross, if you can hear this, do not go to the vehicle. Dresh is static. I do not know when this happened. I found it in the system an hour ago and I have been trying to, static. The secondary location I set up. Remember, the protocol you and I agreed separately from the others, go there. I will explain everything." Dominic Cross pulled the earpiece out. Milo, watching him, said, "What?" "Lev found it too," Dominic Cross said quietly. "He has the secondary location." "Is Lev safe?" Milo asked. Dominic Cross considered it. "He is more afraid than anyone in my organization has ever been," he said, "which means he is telling the truth." They moved 4 kilometers through dark forest, Milo limping but keeping pace, neither of them speaking. The secondary location was a hunter's cabin off any grid, the kind of place that did not appear on maps because it had been built by someone who did not want to be found. Lev was there, pale, wide-eyed, laptop open on a rough table. Lev had found the communication 11 hours ago, an encrypted exchange routed through a layer of obfuscation that had almost fooled him, almost but not quite, because Lev had built the system and knew every single corner of it, every shadow and gap. The exchange was between Dresch and Victor Voss, not recent, old, 4 months old, before Dominic Cross had even received the message about Milo. Which meant that Dresch had not been turned by the mission. He had not panicked and made a desperate decision in the chaos of preparation. He had been positioned carefully and patiently 4 months in advance. Someone had planned this long before the message arrived. Someone had known the message would come. Someone had known that when it did, Dominic Cross would go. Lev pulled up the exchange on his laptop, and Dominic Cross read it. The arrangement was specific. Dresch would coordinate Dominic Cross's mission, would make it real, would bring the inner circle in, would use their genuine resources to plan a genuine extraction. Dominic Cross would go in genuinely believing in the mission, and at the extraction point, both he and Milo would be taken, not killed, taken, to be delivered to a third party, not Voss. A name Dominic Cross had not seen in 6 years. A name that made the cold in his bones feel like something other than hypothermia. "Who is it?" Milo asked. Dominic Cross looked at him. "Karst," he said. Milo stared at him. "Karst is dead," he said. That was the story, Dominic Cross said slowly. And now things were rearranging themselves again. The whole architecture of the past 8 months, the past year, the chain of events from the dead man's letter to the USB drive to the message in Vienna, all of it reforming around a new center of gravity. Karst was not dead. Karst had disappeared, and everything that had happened since Milo's capture, the message to Dominic Cross, the mission, had been designed to bring them both to one place, to bring Dominic Cross and Milo together. Because Karst needed something that only the two of them together could provide. Here is what Lev had found in the deeper layers of Dresch's exchange. Karst was alive and had been living under deep cover for 8 months. He had faked his death to escape a situation that had become unsurvivable. But in faking his death and disappearing, he had separated himself from the one thing he needed most, the ledger. Not just the fragment he had sent to Milo, the complete ledger, which existed in its entirety in 2 halves. One half on the USB drive under Milo's floorboard in Portugal. The other half encoded in a way that required a specific key, in a system that only Dominic Cross had access to. A failsafe that Karst had built in years ago without either man knowing. He had given each of them half. Neither half was usable without the other. And without the complete ledger, Karst, wherever he was and however he was surviving, could not do the one thing he had spent years preparing to do. Which is what Milo said. Dominic Cross looked at Lev. "Tell him," he said. Lev hesitated. Karst's complete ledger, both halves assembled, was enough to take down not just this network, not just Voss or any of the regional organizations. "It goes up to the 4th level," Lev said quietly. "Parliamentary connections in 6 countries, a sitting intelligence minister, 2 Supreme Court appointments that were bought." Karst was building a case, Lev continued. Not for criminals, not for rival organizations, for an international judicial body he had been in contact with for 3 years. He was building a case that would, if the ledger reached them, be the largest organized crime prosecution in European history. Milo looked at Dominic Cross. Dominic Cross looked at Milo. And in the cabin, in the cold, in the dark, something shifted between them, something enormous and old. Karst had used all of them, used Voss's hunger for the ledger, used Dresch's susceptibility to the right offer, used Dominic Cross's sense of debt and Milo's clean-handedness to bring the two halves of something together in a way that no one, not Voss, not Dresch, not the intelligence services of 3 countries, could have predicted or intercepted. And somewhere in this whole architecture of manipulation and necessity, somewhere between the suicide mission and the cold river, and the 15 years of unpaid debt, Dominic Cross and Milo were standing in a hunter's cabin in the woods, understanding that the thing they were caught in was bigger than both of them. But there was one more piece, one thing that Dominic Cross had not told Milo yet, the deepest thing, the one that would change everything. The debt, the truth, and the choice. They had perhaps 2 hours before the search teams extended their radius and found the cabin. Perhaps less. Lev had a vehicle at a secondary point that Dresch did not know about, because Lev, who had always been the most quietly careful of all of them, had built a second exit into every plan for years, a habit of his own that had never been tested until tonight. 2 hours, which meant there was time, not much, but enough. Dominic Cross looked at Milo, and Milo looked back, and the weight of 15 years of silence sat between them like a third person in the room. Milo spoke first. "You should know," he said quietly. "I understood about Ferenczi. I worked it out eventually, about 2 years after I left. I understood what you thought I had done, and I understood why you—" He stopped. "You do not have to," Dominic Cross started. "I am not finished," Milo said. "Not harsh, just clear." "I understood why you made the call," Milo continued. "I understood it intellectually. The damage was real, the threat was real, and from where you were standing the evidence pointed at me. I understood all of that." He looked at Dominic Cross. "What I could never understand was why you did not come to me after, when you found out the truth. Why the silence?" The hardest question, the only one that had ever really mattered. Dominic Cross was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I was ashamed." The word landed in the cabin like something physical. "I had been willing to kill you," Dominic Cross said. "Not because of what you had done, because of what I believed you had done, in a moment of grief and anger, without doing what I should have done, which was wait, investigate, know before acting." He paused. "I had spent 20 years building a code around the idea that you act only when you know. That certainty is not optional. That consequences are permanent, and therefore the work you do before you act is everything." Another pause, and then the one time it mattered most, the one time the person involved was someone I actually. He stopped. The word he did not say did not need to be said. "I broke the code," he said. "The only time it truly mattered, I broke it, and I could not face you with that. I could not stand in front of you and say I tried to have you killed and you did not deserve it, and I am the man who makes that kind of mistake." Silence. "And the package you sent me," Milo said. "The USB drive." "Yes," said Dominic Cross. "Was that what you said it was? Or was that also about this?" Dominic Cross shook his head. "When I sent that, I did not know about Karst's plan. I did not know about any of this. Karst had asked me to keep the second half of the ledger in a system tied to my access codes. I had agreed years ago as a favor, not understanding the full scope. When he asked me to send you the fragment through his letter, he paused. I thought about it for 3 days. And then I thought, the one person I know who has clean hands. The one person I know who is genuinely outside all of this." He paused again. "And I wanted there to be a connection. Some small, practical, deniable connection. Because I had been watching you from a distance for 8 years through people I trusted to watch without interfering, and I—" He stopped again. "I missed you," he said simply. The simplest words, the most expensive. Milo looked at him, and then something in Milo's face, which had been careful and controlled and carefully neutral through all of this, changed. Not softened exactly. Not forgiveness, which was too complicated and too enormous a thing to happen in a cabin in 2 minutes, but something, an acknowledgement, a recognition. "I see you. I see that this is true." "The ledger," Milo said after a moment. "Yes," said Dominic Cross. "Do you know where Karst is?" "No, but Lev might be able to find him, and if we can find him and give him what he needs." Then a lot of very powerful, very dangerous people go to prison, Dominic Cross said. Including people connected to your organization, Milo said. Yes, said Dominic Cross, including perhaps you. A pause. Potentially, said Dominic Cross, and you are still considering it. Dominic Cross looked at him. I am not considering it, he said. I have already decided. Milo stared at him. When? In Vienna, said Dominic Cross. When I read those 3 words, before I even knew about Karst or the plan or any of it, when I understood that you were in danger because of something I had done, I decided. Decided what exactly, Milo asked. Dominic Cross was quiet for a moment. That there was a version of this life where I had done enough harm, he said. Where the ledger and the code and all the careful justifications I had built around what I did, and how I did it were less important than one simple, overdue act of accountability. That is not who you were, Milo said. Not accusatory, just observing. No, said Dominic Cross, it is not. What changed, Milo asked. And Dominic Cross looked at him and said the truest thing he had ever said to anyone. You did not die. Silence. 15 years ago, Dominic Cross said. When I made that call and then unmade it, when I stood down stents and you walked home and you did not know and I watched you not know, something changed. Because I had come that close. That close to erasing someone irreplaceable. Not just to me, to the world. Someone who is genuinely, fundamentally a good man, inside a world that punishes good men for being what they are. He paused. And I had almost taken that from the world because of grief and pride, and the arrogance of thinking I knew the truth before I had done the work of finding it. I owed you a life, he said, the one I almost took, and I have been carrying that for 15 years trying to figure out what paying it looked like. And tonight, Milo started. Tonight was the first installment, Dominic Cross said. The rest of it is the ledger. The rest of it is making sure that this, all of this, the whole structure of harm that I have spent 30 years building ends somewhere. Counts for something, clears something. Even if it costs you everything, Milo said. Yes, said Dominic Cross. Even the organization, Dresch, the network, the thing you spent 30 years, especially those things, said Dominic Cross. Silence. Milo looked at him for a very long time. Then he said something that nobody, not Dresch, not Petra, not Radic, not anyone in 30 years of Dominic Cross's life had ever said to him. 2 words. Thank you, Milo said. Not for the rescue, not for tonight, for the river, for the mission, for the phone call. 15 years ago, for the moment when grief and anger and the enormous machinery of Dominic Cross's world had all been cocked and ready, and something in him, some final, unextinguishable thing, had said no. Thank you, Milo said, for stopping. And Dominic Cross, the man who had managed crises and executed plans and sat at the center of storms for 30 years without visible disruption, looked away, out the window, at the dark, and the silence he kept for a moment was not the silence of control. It was the silence of a man who has just been told that the one moment of his life he is most ashamed of was also the moment that defined everything else. That the debt he thought he owed was not a punishment. It was a beginning. The garden. In the weeks that followed, Lev found Karst. It took 11 days, a trail through 6 encrypted systems, and a final connection made through a channel so obscure that even Dominic Cross had never known it existed. Karst was alive, living under a false identity in a small city in North Macedonia. He was, Lev said after the first contact, extremely unsurprised to hear from them, which was both reassuring and deeply infuriating, because it confirmed that Karst had indeed orchestrated the entire architecture of events, had used Voss's hunger for the ledger, had used Dresch's susceptibility to the right offer, had used Dominic Cross's sense of debt and Milo's clean-handedness to bring the 2 halves of something together in a way that no one could have predicted or intercepted. Dominic Cross, Milo, and Karst met once, briefly, in person, and what was exchanged in that meeting, what was transferred, verified, assembled. and ultimately transmitted to the international judicial body that Karst had been building toward for 3 years, is a matter of record, or it will be, eventually. When the trials begin, when the names start appearing in the documents that will surface in courtrooms and parliamentary investigations and press conferences across 6 countries, when the sitting intelligence minister is arrested on a Tuesday morning in February, at his desk, by officers from an agency he thought he controlled, when 2 Supreme Court appointments are overturned, when the structure that Dominic Cross himself had helped build begins its long, grinding, very public collapse. As for Dresch, Dominic Cross met with him once more, just the 2 of them, in a car on a country road in the gray light of a November afternoon. He did not come with violence. He did not come with threats. He came with the same thing he had brought to Milo in a cabin in the forest: the truth. "What did they offer you?" Dominic Cross asked. Dresch told him. It was not a particularly large amount. It was something more targeted, more painful. Information about a thing in Dresch's past, a debt of his own, a secret that the people working for Karst had found and weaponized with the same cold intelligence that Voss applied to his guests. Everyone has something. Everyone has a room they would pay almost anything to keep locked. Even the most loyal, most trusted, most known people. "You should have told me," Dominic Cross said. Dresch said nothing. "Whatever they had on you, whatever they found, you should have come to me first. The code exists precisely for that." "I know what the code exists for," Dresch said quietly. "I wrote half of it." "Then why did you not come to me?" Dominic Cross asked. "Because I was not sure you would choose the code over what I had done," Dresch said. "And you were afraid of that." "Yes." Dominic Cross looked at the road. "I cannot forgive what you did," he said. "You understand that. If it had gone the other way, if something had happened to Milo because of—" "I know," Dresch said. "But I also understand that you were afraid," Dominic Cross said, "and that what they offered you was not greed, it was survival." "What happens now?" Dresch asked. Dominic Cross looked at him. "Now I think we are both going to have to find out what the rest of our lives look like without the thing we built." They sat for a moment in the car, 2 men at the end of something. In the silence, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not quite, but recognition. The painful, honest recognition of 2 men who had been through too much together to pretend and not enough to repair. It was something. It was all there was. 7 months after the night of the mission, Dominic Cross found Milo in a garden. Not in Portugal, he had sold that apartment. In a different coastal country, warmer, with different light. A garden with tomatoes and basil and a lemon tree that was barely surviving but stubbornly and impressively trying. Dominic Cross had come without announcement. He had come without certainty, without knowing whether he would be welcome, whether the weeks since their last contact had left things better or worse, whether the conversation in the cabin had changed anything or merely named what had always been between them. He knocked on the gate. Milo looked up from the garden. A long moment. The quality of it, the pause before anything is said, is almost unbearable in the right way. Then Milo said, "You have got terrible timing." Dominic Cross looked at him. "I know," he said, "I always have." "I am doing tomatoes," Milo said. "Do you know anything about tomatoes?" "Nothing," said Dominic Cross. "Good," Milo said. "Then you can learn something." And he opened the gate, and Dominic Cross walked through it. And somewhere in the long, complicated, irreversible distance behind them, 30 years of empire and silence and unpaid debts were beginning their slow dissolution into something that might, eventually, look like justice. The lemon tree was still trying. That perhaps was enough. There is a version of this story that ends at the compound, at the fence, at the river, at the moment when a man walked into a suicide mission and walked out the other side with the one person he had spent 15 years trying to deserve. That version is satisfying. It has tension and release. It has the shape of a completed thing, but it is not the whole story. The whole story is longer. The whole story is quieter. The whole story is about the part that comes after the mission, about the fact that walking towards someone you have wronged, crossing the river, cutting the fence, finding the door is only the first part. The second part is harder. The second part is standing in the light of what you have done, being honest about the distance between who you were and who the code said you should be, letting the person you wronged decide what they want to do with that truth. Not managing it, not architecting the outcome, just standing there, open in the garden, knowing nothing about tomatoes, ready to learn. Dominic Cross had spent 30 years building an empire, walls and systems and structures designed to keep him untouchable, invulnerable, perfectly and permanently in control. And at the end of all of it, at the far side of a cold river and a compound and a cabin and a conversation about the one moment of his life when the control had failed and turned out in the failure to be the only thing worth anything, at the end of all of it, he was standing in a garden, not building anything. Unlearning something, which is perhaps the more difficult work. There is a certain kind of man who walks toward death not because he has nothing to live for, but because he has already decided that someone else deserves to live more than he does. But the rarest kind of man, the kind that this world does not often produce, and that the dark corners of it almost never allow, is the man who survives that walk, who comes back from it, and then has the courage to be changed by what he found on the other side. That man, that is who Dominic Cross chose to be, in the end, in the garden with the lemon tree, and someone who had decided quietly to leave the gate open. Outro. If this story moved you, if it stayed with you, if somewhere in the middle of it you felt something shift, that is why we make these. Not for the spectacle, not for the shock, for the shift. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that take the darkest corners of human experience and find the light that is always, always somewhere inside them. Leave a comment with the moment that hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear a story about debts and redemption, and the kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside but costs everything on the inside. And until next time, stay with the difficult things. That is where the real stories live.